In an earlier video and chapter, you learned how to build activity diagrams to document a workflow. In those activity diagrams, you diagram the sequence of steps of a workflow showing how various actors, as shown in swim lanes, work together to carry out a business process. Activity diagrams are also very helpful for documenting the detailed flow of activities of a single use case, usually between a particular actor and the system. Let's see how it works. Here is a portion of the fully developed use case description for Create Customer Account, which shows the flow of activities. The flow of activities describes the interaction between the actor and the system. In this figure, we see that the actor initiates an activity, as shown by item number 1, and the system responds, as shown by items 1.1 and 1.2. The flow of activities is described sequentially, listing the steps in the process both for the actor and the responses by the system. Although this is a good technique to describe the business process, sometimes it is easier to understand if illustrated with a diagram. This activity diagram describes the same flow of activities that we saw in the previous image. As mentioned, the advantage of an activity diagram is that it illustrates the flow graphically to help users understand and envision the interaction between the user and the system. In this diagram, we were a little lazy and did not show the beginning pseudostate. However, the diagram is still quite easy to understand. The two swim lanes we use are the customer and the system. The flow of activities begins with the customer requesting the creation of a customer account. The system responds by creating a new customer instance. A couple of things we notice about an activity diagram versus a use case description. First, the activity descriptions are shorter and more cryptic. Second, the error conditions are not listed in the activity diagram. So we wonder, is this good or bad? One reason we have limited the information on the activity diagram is so that it does not become too cluttered. Because the purpose of an activity diagram is to more easily visualize and understand the overall flow, this simplicity was done on purpose. However, there is no reason why the entire description cannot be entered into each activity oval if that is more helpful. The error conditions were left off for the same reason, to provide a simple version of the flow. However, it might also be helpful to diagram the flow of steps that must occur when an error condition does happen. One powerful way to do this is to create a simple diagram as shown here with only the basic flow, then copy that diagram and add the error condition flow of activities. Here's another example of a flow of activities from the fully developed use case description for the Ship Items use case. In this sequence of steps, there are 5 activities done by the actor with appropriate responses by the system. This description seems to indicate a straightforward flow of activities, but with 4 error conditions. Here is the corresponding activity diagram. This diagram highlights some of the benefits of drawing an activity diagram. In this figure, we note that there is a loop for each cell item, as shown with the synchronization bars at the beginning and ending of the loop. We also note that there is a decision point depending on whether the item is available or not. So by putting the flow of activities into a diagram, these characteristics of the workflow become much more obvious and much easier to visualize. Also in this diagram, the descriptions of individual activities are slightly more elaborate with more detailed narrative. Thus, this activity diagram adds more detail than was documented in the use case description. As before, the error conditions have not been included for reasons of simplicity. Another version of this workflow could be made which adds the steps required to catch and handle those error conditions. Or perhaps a single note could be added to the diagram indicating that a validation error may occur and needs to be handled. As a developer, remember the Agile principles. The objective of diagrams is to enhance understanding, not to make pretty diagrams. So if you have to add notes or other elements to the diagram to facilitate understanding, do not hesitate to do so. This final diagram illustrates the principle we just discussed. In this diagram, we have included use case ovals to indicate that within the flow of activities of a particular use case, other use cases may be invoked. You learned about the includes relationship among use cases when you learned how to draw use case diagrams. This is a more detailed version of that same principle. In this situation, the flow of activities actually indicates where in the flow the other use cases may be invoked. Notice that for ease of understanding, we have used ovals that are slightly different than the rounded rectangles of the activities. The use case ovals are the same symbol that we used in use case diagrams. We have also shaded the use cases to make them easily distinguishable. One final note about documenting use cases. You have learned 3 methods to document the flow of activities of a use case. A use case diagram, with an activity diagram, and with a system sequence diagram. Each model has its own strengths and weaknesses. Each model shows a little different view with different information. However, in most cases, it is not necessary to use all 3 models. Sometimes you will use 1, sometimes 2, and on rare occasions, perhaps all 3. As a developer, you need to know how to use all 3 and be able to distinguish which is best for any given use case or situation.